Good evening. I hope everybody can hear me. Welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're here to talk, to get a presentation from GE about the Reach 6 Woods Pond area remediation and action plans. My name is Joanne Kittrell. I'm a public affairs specialist for EPA Region 1. And as we wait for additional folk to sort of sign in and on, our mission support specialist, Rosa Beato, is going to provide a quick tutorial on Zoom for those of you who might not be familiar with it. Just how to raise your hand to ask a question after the presentation, or if you don't want to speak, you can enter a question on the question and answer box. So Rosa, if you could, I think we all heard the recording that this meeting is being recorded. So I do want to just caution you guys moving forward to be careful about any personal information you might share, because this recording will be made available on our website tomorrow. Thanks, Rosa.
Thank you. Are you going to post the slide?
Yes. Are you ready for me to begin?
Not yet, Kevin. Rosa, I don't believe we have that slide logged in or available right now. Maybe you could just talk people through it.
Sure, no problem. I can do that. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rosa Beato. Before we begin, let me just provide you with some Zoom controls for tonight's meeting. The mute button on the bottom left corner of your screen will allow you to mute and unmute your microphone. However, for the purpose of this meeting, you will be muted throughout the presentation. If you're calling via a mobile phone, you may dial *6 to unmute at the time at the Q&A session. The start and stop video, also on the bottom left corner of your screen, allows you to turn on and off your camera, but for the purpose of this meeting, cameras will remain disabled during the presentation. The Q&A box will be available for you to place, to enter your comments or questions. A member of the team will monitor this box and will answer your questions during the time of the Q&A. The chat box for a member of the team will post important information or links in the chat box. It is disabled for you. Please use the Q&A box to submit any questions or comments, or if you have any technical issues. And then we have the reactions. You will be able to raise your hand icon if you like to ask a question and live. When it is time for you to do so, we will unmute you individually. If you are calling from a mobile phone, you may dial *9 to raise your virtual hand. And again, *6 to mute and unmute. We also have that leave button that allows you to hang up. Once you hang up, you will not be interrupting the meeting if you decide to leave early. And we do have closed captioning available as well for you. So you may turn on live transcript at the bottom of your screen. There should be a button within the Zoom controls that you may do that. So now I'll turn it back to Joanne to introduce your next speaker. Thank you. You're muted.
Thank you. So the Q&A box is in where it says more, right? Yeah, I just click that. Alrighty. And then to raise hand, it's in reactions. Okay, I got it. Thank you. Usually we do Teams, don't use Zoom very much. So again, thanks, welcome. I'm Joanne Kittrell. I'm a public affairs specialist for Region 1. We've got most of the site cleanup team here. I'm joined by my colleagues, Kelsey, project managers, Dean, Josh, Alex, new to the team, Jeff, our legal counsel, John, and your community involvement coordinator, Lauren Draper. Tonight's meeting is focused on Reach 6 conceptual design plan and the relevant documents. It includes Woods Pond, its headwaters, transition zone, outlet channel, and floodplain exposure areas. This will not be the only meeting that we have on the the cleanup design of Reach 6. We anticipate holding an additional meeting once the final design plan is submitted. EPA will be posting GE's presentation tonight on our website tomorrow, as well as the recording of this meeting. So if you know anybody who was not able to join us tonight that really wanted to, if you could let them know that they would be able to view both those things tomorrow, that would be great. And then after the presentation, we'll be displaying a slide that has a list of all of the documents right now that are open for public comment before the end of February. We are going to be limiting the Q&A to Reach 6 specific questions this evening, but please know you don't have to wait for a public meeting to ask us a question. At any time, you can contact Lauren. Her contact information is on the website. So if you have a question, a concern, or information that will help us improve the cleanup at this site or expedite the cleanup at this site, we really want to hear from you. Appreciate you guys being here. Also joining us tonight is GE Senior Project Manager for the site, Kevin Mooney, who will now provide a presentation on the Reach 6 Woods Pond Area Remediation and Action Plan. It's going to take close to an hour, or might be a little bit quicker. Sometimes things go faster when we're presenting, but I will open it up to questions after the presentation. Thanks. Kevin?
Great, thank you. I'll share my screen. And hopefully at this point, people can see my screen. Okay. So good evening. My name is Kevin Mooney. As I was introduced, I'm a project manager for General Electric, and I'm working on the Rest of River project. One aspect of the Rest of River project is Reach 6, Woods Pond. And tonight we're going to give you an overview of the conceptual remedial design, remedial action work plan for Reach 6. Again, this is a conceptual design. This will be followed later by a final design. I'll go through a quick agenda for the talk tonight. We'll give you an overview of the Reach 6 design real quick, get the highlights. Then we'll give you a little bit of background, the Rest of River reaches, the overall implementation schedule, and the recent design submittals. We'll give you a description of Reach 6 Woods Pond area. We'll go through the performance standards that we have to meet with the remediation. We'll go through some of the pre-design activities. The pre-design investigation was essentially the PCB sampling. There was a baseline restoration assessment, which was an ecological survey of the area, and then cultural resource assessment, which was a survey to look at any historic buildings or potential archaeological sites that might be impacted by the remediation in this area. Then we'll go through the conceptual design. We'll go through the remediation plan that's proposed and also the disposal evaluation, where the material will go for final disposal, and talk a little bit about the remediation methods. And then finally, the next steps, what's needed to be done before we get into the final design for Reach 6, which will include some supplemental data collection, the dewatering and water treatment design, and then also the final RDRA work plan. An overview of the Reach 6 design. So EPA provides final permit for the Rest of the River, requires remediation of river sediments and floodplain soil to meet PCB performance standards for Reach 6, and this includes Woods Pond. So the highlights of this conceptual design for Woods Pond is the removal of more than 490,000 cubic yards of sediment, so almost 500,000 cubic yards of sediment will be removed. The sediment will be primarily dredged hydraulically and pumped to the upland disposal facility. There probably will be some limited mechanical removal. This is in cases where we hit large woody debris, tree size branches. And then also if there's limited areas that the hydraulic bridges can't reach. An example of this may be around the bridge abutments for the pedestrian bridge at Woods Pond. There is some limited floodplain soil removal. We'll talk more about that to come. There's the sediment with the highest PCB concentrations will be transported by rail offsite. Right now, this is estimated to be about 8,600 cubic yards. The removal is likely to take 3 to 4 years and will be performed in parallel with remediation activities upstream at Reach 5A, with Reach 5A starting a year before we start getting into the work in Reach 6. The cap will be placed on the sediment post removal, but capping will take place after all the upstream remediation is completed. That includes 5A, 5B, and 5C. So there'll be approximately a 5-year gap before we get into the placement of the cap. And this is due to account for any potential resuspension and settling of material from the upstream remediation efforts coming down and settling in the Woods Pond. Okay, just to orient people a little bit.
Hey, Kevin, can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
Can you, maybe it's just my old ears or something. Can you sit closer to the mic or
Yes.
maybe just
No
punch,
problem.
punch your volume a little? Thanks, sir.
Okay. So the rest of river reaches are shown on this map, and essentially we have an area up here which is the confluence of the east and west branch that's forms the main branch of the Housatonic River, and the primary area of remediation starts there and continues 30 miles downstream to Rising Pond Dam. The focus of the work in the first 10 years is going to be the area upstream of Woods Pond Dam, and that includes 5A. Then we'll jump down to start Reach 6, 5B, and 5C will be done. Once we're done with all the work upstream of Woods Pond Dam, then we'll continue and do the work mainly in the impoundments downstream. There's a number of impoundments in Reach 7, and then there's also an impoundment associated with Rising Pond Dam in Reach 8. The implementation schedule. So down here, we have Reach 5A starting in year 1. And then here, as we're talking about tonight, Reach 6, sediment and soil removal, starting in the second year after 5A is started. That'll continue on this schedule for 3 years. And then we will jump in this area right here. The blue bars are the removal phase, where the green bars are the capping phase of each of the segments. Then we'll get into continue the work, complete the work in 5A, do the work in 5B, do the work in 5C, and come back and do the capping for Reach 6. Before this work can begin, we're doing the pre-work now. The main work that we need to get done right now and we're working on is the final design for Reach 5A and the associated feasibility studies. Also, the UDF construction is completed as well. The design submittals to date, December 20th, we submitted the final revised design for the upland disposal facility, which EPA is currently reviewing right now. Also, we have submitted already the conceptual design for 5A. This has been completed and conditionally approved by EPA, and currently we are working on the supplemental data collection, and the final design is in process. And finally, what we're talking about tonight is the Reach 6 conceptual RD-RA, which is remedial design, remedial action plan, work plan, was submitted to EPA on October 31st, 2024. That's currently under EPA review. And as mentioned earlier, there's a public comment period that's open right now, till, which ends February 3rd. Okay, this slide gives you a description of the Reach 6 of Woods Pond area. Woods Pond proper, which is marked by this upper boundary here, this line, and a southern boundary, which is essentially the pedestrian footbridge located down here. There's an outlet channel, which goes from the pedestrian footbridge down to Woods Pond Dam. There's also the headwater transition zone, which is not going to be included in the Reach 6 work. I'll discuss a little bit later about this design, but there's a different remedy that for the headwaters than Woods Pond, and that the remedy for the headwaters is more similar to the 5C remediation. So the remediation in this area will be included in 5C, which continues upstream and continues for a number of miles upstream. Also included in this remediation are 5 floodplain exposure areas: exposure area 56, 57, 58, 59, and exposure area 60. And shown in this bright green color is also the frequently used sub areas. Essentially, they're trails, whether they're proper trails or they're dirt roads that people utilize in the area for recreation. So this is starts on the west side of pedestrian footbridge, goes across, there's a spur that goes south here, and then it continues along the dirt road that encircles Woods Pond. Once we get here, the road is kind of out of the exposure area, so we don't continue the frequently used sub area into EPA 57. One of the things to note on here will come up again, this purple dashed line is referred to the 1 milligram per kilogram or 1 part per million PCB isotype. So any data that was PCB soil data that was collected between the bank of Woods Pond and this purple line is above 1 milligram per kilogram. Data on the outside of this line is less than 1 milligram per kilogram. And so the focus of the floodplain investigation will be in this area between the bank and the purple line. So this is where the sampling and the evaluation take place. In addition to Woods Pond, we're also going to remediate Valley Mill Pond, which is south of Woods Pond, as part of this remedial effort. So just to orient you again, this is Woods Pond proper. Here's the pedestrian footbridge. Woods Pond Dam is here, and the Housatonic River continues down here. Valley Mill Pond is located down here. It is hydraulically connected to Woods Pond for a raceway channel, which is separate but parallel to the Housatonic River. Back when in the 1800s, when the original dam was built and there was a paper mill here, the water was impounded in Valley Mill Pond and released through the mill building through an outlet channel over here. That powered the mill equipment. That exit has been long closed off, and so right now Valley Mill Pond is kind of a dead end. There is no outlet. The level of water just fluctuates up and down according to the level of water in Woods Pond. So the Reach 6 performance standards for Woods Pond sediment, and this includes the outlet channel, we are removing sediment and placing an engineered cap to achieve a post-capping minimum water depth of 6 feet. And the slope from shore after this removal is required to be as steep as possible while maintaining stability and resisting any erosion or slumping of material down the bank into the deeper parts of the pond. So with the Wood Pond remediation requires removal of sufficient sediment in areas currently deeper than 6 feet to allow for an engineered cap and a final grade at least as deep as the original grade. So we have to remove all the material down to 6 feet and then remove, essentially, if we're putting in a 1 foot cap, another foot of material down to 7 feet if to maintain an original, to achieve the final grade of 6 feet throughout the whole pond, at least 6 feet. There are some deeper areas. For the floodplain soil, we have to excavate the top foot of soil to achieve the PCB performance standard that's applicable to each of the exposure areas. Each of the exposure areas were evaluated back in the human health risk assessment, and a particular PCB concentration was for each exposure area was selected by recreational use in that area. And once we do the excavation, that would be backfilled to grade and then restored. We also have to remediate inverter pools containing soil averages that exceed 3.3 milligrams per kilogram PCBs. The Valley Mill Pond, the final permit does not establish a performance standard for this area. However, Valley Mill Pond is very similar to the numerous backwaters that are located upstream. So GE has proposed to EPA that we use a backwater standard for Valley Mill Pond. This performance standard would be to remove sediments, including any of with PCBs greater or equal to 50 milligrams per kilogram, and replace it with an engineered cap to achieve an overall average concentration of 1 milligram per kilogram. So the REACH 6 pre-design investigation. So this was work done essentially mostly in 2023 and some in 2024. And this was data that was collected to help us with the conceptual design, remedial design for Woods Pond. There was bathymetry and topography surveys done. There was a shoreline survey done. There was sediment and floodplain soil PCB sampling done. Also geotechnical testing of sediment done. This was to inform the how steep we can make the bank slope. The sediment and floodplain soil PCB sampling was conducted primarily August through October 2023. And for PCB sediment, we collected 535 samples from 102 locations, with the maximum depth going down to 8 feet in Woods Pond. For the floodplain soil PCB samples, we collected 627 samples from 301 locations. So also on the same day that we submitted the conceptual design, we also submitted the pre-design investigation summary report. And so this report just cataloged and presented all the data that was collected in the 2023-2024 timeframe. This slide and the next are just where those PCB sampling locations were located. This first slide covers the sediment PCB sampling locations. Again, this is the boundary of Woods Pond. We did do sampling in the headwater area, although that area will not be included in the Woods Pond remediation, but will be included in the 5C remediation. So the sampling included Woods Pond and the outlet channel. Yellow boxes on this figure show samples were collected as part of the pre-design investigation. And the solid black circles used for the locations of where we had historical data. And both the historical data and the new PDI sampling data was included in the evaluation. Similar to the sediment, I'm now presenting the floodplain sampling locations. Again, we had the 5 exposure areas, 56, 57, 58, 59, and 60. And as I mentioned before, this purple line is the 1 ppm isoplex, or the 1 milligram per kilogram PCB isoplex. So all of this focus of the sampling was in the area between the bank and this purple line, the 1 ppm isoplex. As in the other figure, these yellow squares represent the newly collected data, the PDI sampling data, and the black circles are the historic data locations. Along with the chemical, the PCB sampling and the geotechnical sampling and survey work, we also did a baseline restoration assessment. Essentially, this was an ecological survey of the area that would be potentially impacted by the remediation. So this work was conducted in 2023 and 2024. The VRA report summarizing all the data collected was also submitted October 31st, 2024, and is under EPA review. It covered the aquatic habitats, which is Woods Pond, the Outlet Channel, and Valley Mill Pond. One of the main things to point out here is that the Woods Pond area is a eutrophic body. That means it's nutrient rich with very extensive aquatic growth. However, most of this aquatic growth are invasive species, primarily water chestnut, which will have to be removed and prevented from going back during the remediation and restoration. The floodplain habitats consist of wetland swamp area, upland habitat, and 2 vernal pools. Threatened or endangered species habitat was also evaluated. Reach 6 has designated a potential habitat for at least 8 state-listed species and 3 federally listed species or proposed for listing. Final design will evaluate the potential habitat impacts and specifically where it impacts habitat that's associated with the threatened or endangered species, and steps will be taken to mitigate that impact, and also that information will fully inform the restoration, the habitat restoration post removal and backfill. Another aspect which we investigated was cultural resources assessment. Again, as I mentioned before, this is looking at any historic buildings or potential archaeological sites in the area that could be impacted by the remediation. So for the phase 1A CRA in 2023, phase 1 CRA report described process to identify these areas with the known or potentially cultural resources and historic structures that could be affected by the remediation. One historic site was identified, and that is the Lennox Railroad Station, which is just west of Woods Pond, located along the railroad tracks. While it will not be impacted by the remediation, the area adjacent to the Lennox Railroad Station and very nearby is potentially a site for a railroad sighting. So the impact on the Lennox Railroad Station will need to be evaluated. One of the next steps, which is referred to as the phase 1B cultural resources survey, will evaluate whether remediation support area activities will impact significant cultural resources, essentially any areas that potentially contain archaeological sites. So there was a phase 1B CRA work plan submitted to EPA on November 15th, 2024, and describes these plans activity. What's shown in the picture here, if there's an area that we have to investigate basically in the floodplain, we have to dig a pit and go down. The pit is essentially 1.5 feet by 1.5 feet wide, and it's a square hole. It has to be dug down to 3 feet, and the soil is taken out in lifts of 2 to 3 inches and put through a screen, sifted, and any artifacts found are bagged and sent to a lab for identification. And if there is a significant amount found, then we have to take steps to protect whatever is identified. So let's get into now. This is the proposed Reach 6 remediation plan. What will be done? So for Woods Pond and the outlet channel sediment, there will be variable removal depth throughout the pond because we are trying to remove sediment. So we do final pond depth and also install a catch, but we want to have a final pond depth of 6 feet. Hydraulic dredging is planned for most of the sediment. There may be some mechanical removal needed for debris in the area, any areas accessible by hydraulic dredge. And as mentioned before, the capping will occur later after all the completion of the upstream remediation, which includes 5A, 5B, and 5C. And what this figure you're looking at now shows is the depth of Woods Pond, and it's presented as shaded colors. Basically, the shallowest area is in yellow, and then you proceed to get into darker shades of green, the blue, and then purple, which is the depth of 6 to 7 feet. Any areas greater than 7 feet are this gray area here. So we have a deep hole located here in the pond, and then we have the outlet channel and into the main flow through the pond are also both deeper than 7 feet. So all this area that's not grade shaded, it will have to be moved down to a depth of at least 6 feet plus the thickness of the cap to be installed later. And then an additional foot will likely be removed if the cap removed is 1 foot thick in these gray shaded areas. We may need to go a little deeper in the outlet channel area. We may need a thicker cap here due to higher flows. The method for sediment removal is mainly going to be hydraulic dredging and transport. So the hydraulic dredges will remove sediment by dislodging sediment and sucking sediment into a pipeline via a dredge pump. The water will be sucked in with the sediment to create a slurry. And this slurry will be piped and transported to the dewatering area at the UDF using large diameter pipes and pumps. Once the sediment is at the UDF and dewatered, the resulting water will be treated at an on-site water treatment facility. And once it meets EPA approved discharge limits, it will be discharged either back to Woods Pond or to the Housatonic River. I'll show you a little bit, I'll talk through a little bit what you're seeing in these figures right here. So this is an example of a hydraulic dredge. There's a dredge on the front of this with a cutter head, which will kind of churn up the sediments. And then there is a pipe right behind it, which will suck the sediments. There's a pump located on the barge, and the material will be pumped via this floating pipeline to the shore. Once at the shore, it will then, there will be another pump that'll take the slurry and put it through a thicker pipeline that will then pump it up to the UDF. And I'll show you in a later slide, I'll show you a diagram of what that would look like in the field. So let's talk now Valley Mill Pond sediment. This remediation, it will occur as part of the Reach 6 work. So again, just to orient you what you're seeing here, this is Woods Pond Dam. This is the Housatonic River here. This is a raceway channel associated with the dam that is hydraulically connected to Woods Pond, and that connects Valley Mill Pond to Woods Pond. We did not collect sediment, PCD sediment data as part of the last go around of data collection to support the design. There is some historic data located at these black dot locations. And what is also shown here are proposed sediment sample locations, these yellow dots. So this work and this data collection will take place in 2025. And we'll use that data as part of the final design process to determine what remediation will look like for Valley Mill Pond. Continuing with the discussion of remediation, now we're going to get into what's going to happen with the floodplain soil and the vernal pools. Again, there's 5 exposure areas, 56, 57, 58, 59, and 60. 2 of the exposure areas will need floodplain soil removed in 58. There's kind of a blow-up box here so you can get a better view of it. This is the dirt road that goes around Woods Pond, and right next to that road, there's an area of floodplain soil that needs to be removed in exposure area 58. In frequently used sub area, which is located, and again, the frequently used sub areas are essentially trail areas or dirt roads. There's a section of that will need to be mediated in exposure area 59. And this is an area that is just on this side of the pedestrian bridge. And the red hatched area show where the floodplain removal will take place. For the vernal pools, there are 2 vernal pools located in the area adjacent to Woods Pond. There's one to the north here and one to the south. And they're basically blue on this figure. Based on the sampling we did in the vernal pools, both vernal pools, the average PCB concentration is below the conformance standard of 3.3 milligrams per kilogram. So there will be no remediation in the 2 vernal pools associated with the Woods Pond remedial area. And part of, once we have now identified the material that will be moved, we have to do a disposal evaluation. And this disposal evaluation will determine whether the material that was removed will go to the UDF or be targeted for off-site disposal. I'll go through the sediment disposal first and then the floodplain. The criteria for sediment disposal is sediments may be disposed of in UDF only if the average PCB concentration is 25 milligrams per kilogram or less. Another requirement is that any sediment associated with a single vertical pore must have an average PCB concentrations of 100 milligrams per kilogram or less. If they're above the 100 milligrams per kilogram, they'll be segregated for off-site disposal. So in Woods Pond, no individual pores had an average PCB concentrations over 100 milligrams per kilogram. And the average PCB concentration of the sediments removed is 3.5 milligrams per kilogram. Therefore, all the sediment removed from Woods Pond and the outlet channel will be transported to the UDF for disposal. For Valley Mill Pond, right now we only have the historical data, and we'll be collecting additional data this year in 2025. But based on that, there is a number of sediments that do not meet the criteria for the UDF disposal, and they will be segregated, transported to the UDF for a separate dewatering, and then taken to the rail loading area near Woods Pond for off-site rail, for off-site disposal via rail. For the floodplain soil, the criteria for floodplain soil may be disposed of in the UDF only if average PCB concentrations are less than equal 50 milligrams per kilogram for each exposure area. Based on this criteria, our evaluation was that the soil from exposure area 50 is greater than 50 milligrams per kilogram, so that will be segregated for off-site disposal. Soil from exposure area 59, the frequently used sub area, which is the trail area by the pedestrian bridge, is less than 50 milligrams per kilogram and will be disposed of in the UDF. Other things that we considered during this REACH-6 design evaluation included the preliminary cap evaluation. As I mentioned before, for Woods Pond, we have to have a final depth in the pond of 6 feet or greater. And this has to account for the thickness of the cap. So we have to design the cap, determine how much material we'll need to remove for a 12, for a foot cap, which is a foot thick, we'll have to move up to 6 feet and then add another foot of removal to account for the placement of the cap.
Hey, Kevin, it's Joanne again. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
Still having a little bit of trouble hearing you. It's a little muffled. I don't know if you need to raise the volume on your computer or just sit closer.
Okay, I'll try to
Thank you, sir.
talk louder.
Thanks.
Will do. So right now for our preliminary evaluations, we're looking at a 12-inch sand gravel cap that will be moved in Woods Pond and a thicker cobble armored cap that will be moved to the outlet channel. And that is, I mentioned before, due to higher velocities that are seen in the outlet channel compared to the rest of the Woods Pond. Also, we evaluated the slope of the banks. I mentioned before, one of the requirements is that the slope from the bank to the 6-foot depth is as steep as possible. So we had to perform geotechnical investigation work to look at the stability of potential slopes and configurations at the shore. Based on these evaluations, the results were used to estimate sediment removal volumes. This chart here is a table of the removal volumes. What we have in the left-hand column are these different media. We have Woods Pond Dam sediment, outlet channel sediment, Valley Mill Pond sediment, floodplain soil, and vernal pools. Across the top, we have the estimated remediation area, the estimated removal volume, and then we split this removal volume into what will go to the UDF and what will be segregated for off-site disposal. For the Woods Pond sediment, the removal volume is 461,000 cubic yards, all of which will go to the UDF. For the outlet channel sediment, 20,000 cubic yards, all of which are going to the UDF. For Valley Mill Pond sediment, we have 12,300 cubic yards of removal. 3,700 will go to the UDF and 8,600 are going for offsite disposal. For the floodplain soil, we have 20 cubic yards of removal, 10 of which will go to the UDF and 10 will go for offsite disposal. Vernal pools, as we mentioned before, the current PCB concentrations meet the performance standards, so there will be no removal in the vernal pools. So the estimated total volume is 493,320 cubic yards. So in order to implement the remediation work in Woods Pond, we will need to build some support facilities that are not currently there. One of these facilities will be a shoreline support area, which will be located down here. This is going to be essentially a bulkhead, a docking area for the hydraulic dredges and other boats needed for the remediation work. The other location that we'll need to build is the Woods Pond rail spur, which will be located on the west side of Woods Pond along the railroad tracks. We have to compete as part of the supplemental data work that we have to do this summer. We'll be doing geotechnical investigations and survey work at both these locations to make sure that we can do the final design for these structures. This is kind of also, as I mentioned before, the shoreline support facility and then how it's going to be connected to the UDF area. This area right here is a corner of Woods Pond. This is the shoreline support facility that where the hydraulic dredges will basically be docked. Located on the support facility will be a pump, a booster pump that will pump the material up to the UDF. So this light blue line, this is the pump here, and this light blue line will be a pipeline that will essentially follow Woods Glen Road and then cut into the GE property and go to this area here that's outlined in a pink dashed line. And this is the conceptual location for the sediment dewatering. For this particular configuration, we're assuming a geotextile watering technique. The water that comes off the dewatering process will then go to the water treatment system, which will be located here. Once this water is treated and meets the EPA approved discharge standards, this water then will be piped back, and we're showing this as this darker blue line here. And this water will basically follow the same path as the hydraulic pumping pipeline, and then will potentially discharge next to the support facility back into the Woods Pond. This will be investigated further and as part of the final design. Some quality of life considerations for the final design. In November 2024, GE submitted to EPA a revised quality of life compliance plan, and that included quality of life standards for air, noise, odor, and lighting. During the REACH 6 remediation, best management practices will be used, and there will be routine control measures implemented to maintain compliance with quality of life standards. We'll have regular monitoring for air quality and noise that will be performed throughout the project, and that will basically verify that we're complying with the standards. If needed, contingency response actions and mitigation measures will be implemented in coordination with EPA to address any exceedances of the quality of life standards. So REACH 6 design and pre-construction plans will describe the specific measures that are specific to the REACH 6 remediation that will be implemented to mitigate potential exceedance of quality of life standards. So just to kind of reiterate, the revised quality of life plan that was submitted in November 2024, that was more a general look at the quality of life standards, and REACH 6 final design will take that information and apply it specifically to the REACH 6 remediation. So next steps for REACH 6. The main next step will be the supplemental data collection targeted for 2025. This will include the sediment sampling in Valley Mill Pond and any associated floodplain soil sampling that is needed, and also sediment and waste characterization for disposal. We have to do general screening testing of the sediment to characterize it for both the UDF disposal and offsite disposal. There will be upland and in-water geotechnical characterizations, and mainly associated with that bulkhead shoreline facility and the rail spur. Field studies will also include bathymetry and topography, the shoreline delineation, and detailed surveys of structures and utilities in the area. And then we will also potentially take geotechnical data in Valley Mill Pond to support CAP design. Next steps continued is the dewatering and water treatment design, which would be key to the work for Woods Pond. So conceptual plans were submitted to EPA on this December 20th, 2024. So treatability studies will test potential technologies for sediment dewatering and water treatment for the hydraulically transported dredge slurry. Data from the treatability testing will be used to support the final design for sediment dewatering and the water treatment systems to be used to be installed at the EPA. The final RDRA work plan for REACH 6 is targeted to be submittal in 2026, and the final design will be submitted 60 days after the approval of the various data collection activity reports and the dewatering and water treatment design reports. Once that has all been squared away, this will be followed by contracted procurement and then the actual remediation work involved in the including the sediment and soil removal in the Reach 6 area. So in summary, we're kind of at the end of the presentation now. So this is a quick summary of some of the material that we covered during the presentation. So the conceptual design includes removal of more than 490,000 cubic yards of sediment. The sediment will be hydraulically dredged and pumped to the UDF, supplemented by limited mechanical removal. There will be limited floodplain soil removal. Some material with higher PCB concentrations will be transported off-site by rail, estimated right now to be 8,610 cubic yards. The removal will take 3 to 4 years to complete. Sediment cap will be replaced after upstream remediation is done. And this upstream remediation, as I mentioned before, will include the completion of 5A, 5B, and 5C remediation, removal, and capping. Currently, there's a public input period on the conceptual design, which ends February 3rd. So following EPA review of the conceptual RDRA work plan and following the supplemental data collection and associated design evaluations, GE will submit to EPA a final RDRA work plan, which is our remedial design, remedial action work plan for Woods Pond. Thank you. So that's the end of the formal presentation. And now we'll move on to questions. And I'll look to EPA to facilitate that.
Thank you, Kevin. That's a lot of information. And just want to remind everybody that this presentation will be on the website tomorrow, along with a recording of this meeting. So before I start the Q&A, I just want to throw it back to Rosa Beato on our mission support team to just go over the navigation of the Zoom tools. We're going to maybe take 2 questions if you raise your hands, and then maybe go to questions from the Q&A box, so everybody has an opportunity. Rosa, do you want to show us again how to do this?
Sure. No problem. Let me just get my slide up on the screen. And I think, are you able to see my presentation in one slide?
Yep.
Okay, great. Do you see the full slide or the
Not the full screen. I cut.
Okay. All right, let me just do this. I think I need to bring it to my other screen. Sorry
Looks
about
very
that.
little.
Yes. I will do that right now. Sorry about that. Okay. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I think,
I see some hands up, so everybody knows that we just go to reactions to raise your hand if you want to ask a question. And then if, and I see that we've got some questions. If you go to the more circle and open that, there's Q&A, right? So they just need to do that.
yes. Yes, they
Okay.
can raise their hand and we can unmute them individually. And do
Okay.
you want me to unmute them now individually?
Let me go ahead and call by name so that not everybody's talking at once. All right. I do want to remind everybody too that because this is recorded, be really careful with any personal information. Also, because I see a lot of questions, and we've got another hour or so we should be okay. But if you could limit your questions to like 2 minutes, just to make sure we can get to everybody who might have a question. And then time permitting, we'll circle back and answer any other questions. I think that would be incredibly helpful. So I don't know if there's an order. I'm gonna just go with what I see on my screen. I don't have like who raised their hand first. So I see Marshall Mermel, sir, if you'd like to just give us, well, we have your name.
Yes.
And if you want to turn on your audio, that's cool too. Or your video, that's cool too. So what's your question?
Okay, quick question. I thought it was a great presentation, Kevin. Pretty thorough. One question, or actually two related questions. When was the PCBs first introduced into the area? Do you know what year that was? And connected to that, has the concentration of PCBs been measured over time, or just in your presentation, the time frame that you mentioned?
Okay, the answer to the first question is that they started using PCBs at the Pittsfield site, the GE-Pittsfield site, in the 1930s. And then they discontinued the use in the, I think, mid to late 70s. And I'm not, the PCBs over time, I'm not sure. The historic data was probably collected in Woods Pond in basically year kind of 2000, 2001 and before. So there's a big gap between the historic data and then the most recent data that we collected in 2023. I will say that we collected probably equal or more. There's probably more data than historic data. The historic data was collected and probably for different reasons at different times, and did not have the spatial coverage that the more recent data did. We did kind of the more recent data on a spatial grid pattern to make sure we had good coverage in both the sediment and the section.
Thank you very much. That was really great, and look forward to the process moving forward.
Thank you for the question. I'm going to take another question from raised hands, and then we'll go to the Q&A box. Caitlin, you have a question for us tonight?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, I have a couple of questions, so I was just gonna run through them, and then if you need me to repeat any of them, I'll go back to them.
If you can keep it to about 2 minutes, we just want to make sure we can get to all the questions. And once we go through everybody, you're more than welcome to raise your hand again. That would be fine.
Okay, I mean, it's all kind of tied into the same thing. It's just a couple of questions, so just stop me if you need to. But I just want to say thank you for the work that's gone into this. I do have some questions because I'm not sure that I'm hearing all of this correctly. But from what I'm understanding, well, let me start by saying my understanding is that the only true safe level of PCBs is 0. Like that is, from what I understand, is the only true safe level on a long-term basis. And science consistently shows they're persistent, they bioaccumulate, and they're harmful even at low levels. But this plan allows for leaving quite a significant concentration, like I think it was 25 milligrams per kilogram in sediment, and I don't know, 50 or something in soil. And so I was just hoping you could help me understand how those levels were determined to be safe for a community that's living and playing near these areas. I mean, you talk about Woods Pond, and I'm not sure of the geographic location, but I know like Canoe Meadows and things like that, I believe is part of that area. And I mean, I didn't even know that was contaminated until I started learning about this. Like we go down there and we dig and catch frogs. We didn't know that. We had no idea. So I'm concerned that, we're taking a whole bunch of poison that GE left us and just moving it to another place when none of it's safe. So I just wanted to understand that a little bit better.
Absolutely. Let me ask Dean, do you mind, Dean is a project manager, very familiar with the site. If are you able to?
Sure, I'll do my best.
Thank you,
Hopefully
sir.
you can hopefully you can hear me. So
Yep.
GE didn't set the cleanup standards, EPA did. We did it through a long detailed process over 15 years, starting with what's called the Human Health Risk Assessment, where EPA scientists evaluate the risk. That went through an external non-EPA scientific peer review, and then we finalized that risk assessment. As you mentioned, there's very few chemicals have zero risk at any concentration. So EPA's regulations and guidelines have what they have determined, that others have determined, Congress and EPA regulations, acceptable risk ranges. And that's what we do at every Superfund site, is to come up based on how often people are in contact with the contaminant, what is acceptable. And I think we went through a little bit this with the air survey, but there's excess lifetime cancer risks, over 10,000 or 100,000 is considered acceptable by EPA. So that's how it was set. So that is where it was turned into performance standards, and GE needs to meet those performance standards. So if it's a floodplain soil, it's based on how often people are expected to be exposed. And then there's a calculation of the acceptable concentration that can remain. As far as Woods Pond itself, the sediment, it's all going to be excavated. Well, there's going to be a clean cap paste, placed after it. But again, back to that's why we're having GE do this remediation, is to reduce the risk. And far and away, the highest risk to human health is consumption of fish. So that is and will be our main goal for the remediation. So hopefully that helps.
One thing I'll add on top of that, and it's, Caitlin, you mentioned the 25% milligrams per kilogram for sediment and the 50 for floodplain. Those were in reference to how removed material will be segregated between on-site disposal and off-site disposal. So those numbers were not connected to cleanup numbers. And I'm sorry if I wasn't clear on that in the presentation.
No, thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Caitlin. Do you have another question, or should we circle back to you? You're on mute. If I see your hands raised. So
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Once I unmuted once again, muted again. So it does kind of answer my question, just like Dean had mentioned, there's no chemicals, that it's not, there's zero. I get that, but I mean, we're living in it. We're down by the rivers, we're playing in it, it's volatilizing into our homes. Like, we live in this all day long. And I still find the levels, I think it was like even the 3 kilograms or milligrams per kilogram. I mean, that's very high, even for just regular, standards in terms of what I've read, because like I said, 0 is the safe amount. And this isn't just any chemical. I mean, this is a neurotoxin. It's a mutagenic, so it mutates your DNA. It disrupts all of your hormones. It mimics the thyroid hormones. I mean, it is highly, highly toxic. It is not just like any other chemical. So that's where my concern comes from. This really doesn't speak to anything about the long-term risks to us being here with this. So, I mean, GE left us with all of this poison to begin with. And from a scientific point of view, I don't see how that leaving that amount of poison still, even with capping in an area that's, it's a floodplain. So like, there's lots of movement and there's a lot of opportunity for caps to fail. And so I don't see how that isn't a violation of our human rights to just clean air and water, just living in an area.
Excuse me for interrupting. If you haven't already, the public comment deadline is coming up. So we would love it if you would provide those comments to us for our record.
For sure. I guess really get an answer to how, I guess Dean answered to the technical part of it, but I guess I just don't understand how current science plays into that assessment and how we got to that specific number of whatever it was, 3 kilograms or milligrams.
Honestly, I don't either. But that was what the science came up with. So, all right, I'm going to move on to another question. If there's
Joe,
time,
before you-
Caitlin, you have another. Oh, no, please. Yeah.
Sorry,
jump in.
one misconception I kind of want to clear up. Hi, my name's Josh Fontaine. I'm one of the RPMs for EPA. Is when the cap is put in place, everything's done. And that's not nearly the case. There's still monitoring that is going to have to occur after the cleanup is done to ensure that the cap is functioning properly, including sampling, monitoring, and all that type of stuff. So just because the plan is proposing a cap in place doesn't mean the project's over. There's still going to be monitoring for many, many, many years to come after everything's said and done.
I appreciate that. I just, as a parent, I feel like that is just burdening my children with like this is something that should be removed, or at least, I mean, that just seems like a really high level to be okay with leaving. And then the fact that it seems that we're averaging to get to what sediment is going to be dumped in Lee versus transported out. So it seems I'm kind of curious how those borders were created and then to determine what's averaged together to get that number, because it seems like there might actually be sediment that is significantly higher that ends up in Lee because on average it fell within that. Am I understanding that correctly?
Caitlin, we're going to move on. Okay. We're actually
Joe, could Kevin actually
for,
talk about the averaging and how that was calculated? Because there are some additional questions about that process in the Q&A.
about how the 3.3 was determined?
No. For when the samples were collected and the material was determined on where it should be disposed in. Kevin, could you speak a little bit more about that? I know you touched on it in the presentation.
Excellent.
But it would be good for some additional clarity.
Sure. I mean, for sediment, when we took a core, we'll take the sampling core, we basically will go down pretty deep. Some of the sampling cores in Woods Pond were as deep as 8 feet. So one of the things we have to do is we segregate by different depths to look at the profile with over depths. And one of the things is if that core comes back with an average over 100 milligrams per kilogram, that and the polygon around that core, that would have to be then segregated and put for offsite disposal. And then the other thing that kind of drives the criteria is the 25 milligrams per kilogram average overall material being removed. So that's what we have to compare to. So if an area is above the 25 milligrams per kilogram, that's got to be taken offsite. If it's under, the overall average of all the material coming out in Woods Pond is 3.5 milligrams per kilogram, which is well under the 25 milligram per kilogram criteria. So that's the average concentration of all the material being removed from Woods Pond. In terms of the floodplain, we have one area that the average amount of material coming out was over 50 for the floodplain. So that is going to be segregated for offsite disposal. Then we have another area that the average concentration of the material coming out is under 50 milligrams per kilogram. So that material is going to go to the UVF. I don't know if that helps, or if Josh, you were looking for more explanation than that.
No, I think that's helpful for now. like we mentioned before, this isn't the last meeting we're going to have on the Reach 6 RDRA. There will be another meeting that we'll be holding after the final is completed and submitted for EPA review and approval. So there'll be more discussions.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you both. Before I go to the Q&A box, Dr. Kenny, did you have a question? If so, you can unmute yourself. And and just
Thank you
say
very
your
much.
name.
Yes, I unmuted now. I'm
Cool.
Charles Kenny. I'm the medical director of the Tri-Town Health Department. And I want to thank Mr. Mooney for his presentation. Thank you very much. My major concern that I want to, I realize we're short of time. I want to address the issue of how long this is taking. You know, the total project is quite long. And so I'm looking at how we might reasonably speed it up. And I understand there are many technical things that I'm not privy to and that things take a long time, but I'm from my relatively simplistic viewpoint, it seems to me pretty straightforward that certain things might take place that could speed this up. So first, Mr. Mooney, how many hydraulic dredging barges will you have in Woods Pond?
Well, and that's, right now, this is the conceptual design, so we're gonna kind of work that out on the final design. One of the thoughts is, our estimate of time right now is based on if we had 2 hydraulic pumps, dredges out there going, and if they were working 10 to 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, you know, we would finish in about 3 years. If we only had one, we'd have to run that, you know, up to 20 hours a day and run that 6 days a week. You know, it might be 24 hours a day, around the clock. So, you know, we are exploring different options with the different hydraulic dredges, but there is a limited area out there, and we do have the floating pumping line. So, there may be a limit to how many hydraulic dredges we can have operating in the area at the same time. But issues like this, again, I'll stress that this is a conceptual design. So this is kind of a proof of concept, and then kind of looking at what can be done. And we'll get into more detail as we go through the final design, collecting more information to help inform that final design.
Well, thank you for that part of the answer. You know, as someone who wants to put in an efficient public comment, it's usually more helpful to have specific information rather than have possibilities and things. So just taking it from your speculation that you might have 1 or 2, if you had 4, now it's a 50-acre lake. And, you know, these barges aren't that big. If you had 4 of them, wouldn't you, if you took the two barge limit that you were first talking about, if you took it and you made 4, wouldn't you cut that 3-year period down to 1.5 years? And if not, how could that possibly be the case?
Well, I think there may be a limit to how many we can have out there at one time. There's also the limit that all this material then has to be pumped from shore up to the UDF. And there may be also a limit of how much material can be processed in the wastewater treatment plant and the watering facility as well.
Well, thank you for being very clear on that point. So let me ask you a follow-up point based on that. If the rate at which it can be hydraulically dredged is limited to the capability, the throughput capability of the dewatering and water treatment facility that's proposed to be located on site at the UDF, wouldn't an auxiliary dewatering and water treatment plant placed somewhere else, such as near one of the rail staging things? And for example, I've done a lot of investigation and talked to the Columbia Mill people who own it. They're willing to demolish the buildings. Housatonic Railroad says that there will be enough space there for their rail staging. There's 50 acres of property there that they can use. And the distance from the Columbia Mill to the UDF is short enough that you've already proposed to do hydraulic dredging from there up to the UDF. You could go downhill from Woods Pond to Columbia Mill use that as your primary dewatering site. It'd be bigger than the UDF. You'd be able to do it faster. You could have a couple of pipes, and you could do 5C at the same time. And so my second question is now, why are you not doing 5C at the same time?
Again, we're kind of hopscotching down. We're doing starting with 5A and a year lag, and then we're starting 5C. And the reason we're not capping.
That's not my question. I'm asking you why you aren't hydraulically dredging 5C at the same time.
Well, because there is going to be a limit again to the infrastructure. I'm not sure, you know, I won't speculate. I'm not sure it's going to be a viable idea that we then expand the area down to Columbia Mill. That's far away from our operations center. And there potentially could be a limit of just space and infrastructure, and also, you know, the contractor capabilities to get this work done. And not that it said, you know, we can go through and kind of run that to ground through the final design, but it is far away, and a satellite off area like that might not be feasible to actually conduct the remediation.
Yeah, this is Dean again from EPA on the 5C question, Dr. Kinney. That direction to GE came from us. We think Woods Pond has by far the highest volume, and it's relatively the easiest to pump out. So to get the mass removal out as quickly as possible, we went back and forth as to where GE could have two crews, and thought 5A and Woods Pond was by far the best. That's the two largest areas of volume. Combining 5C with Woods Pond, I don't think is necessarily going to speed it up. 5C is going to be done fairly shortly right after Woods Pond. There is a small stretch 5B in between, but it's limited. And as Kevin said, there are limitations at the UDF. There just are. There's only so much you can dewater. So, you know, that was more EPA's call. The initial plan just had 5A going. So the volume in Woods Pond around 500,000, 5C, which needs a lot more investigative work and resources, is probably on the area of 100,000. So we went where the largest volume was to get as much out of the river as possible. Ideally, you could work all 8 reaches at the same time, but as Kevin said, I think there's a feasibility limit there.
I appreciate that answer. Thank you, Mr. Taliaferro. I would just like to make it very clear for everybody, just so that everybody knows that. It seems to me from what Mr. Mooney is saying, and also from what you're saying, that the ability of the dewatering and water treatment facility at the UDF is potentially going to be a limiting factor for how fast we can move the material out of Woods Pond. And I would like to have that reconsidered. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I see a few more hands up, but before we go to those, I wanted to check with Kelsey. Kelsey, do we have some questions in the Q&A box that we should address?
We do. We have several in the Q&A box. So I think if that's okay, we would take maybe one here. There's several questions related to dredging, so I thought maybe we could start there, and probably for Kevin, and then maybe if Dean wants to jump in. Sorry, so a question: if the number of crews, barges, and pipelines were doubled, would that not cut the time required for the remediation in half? And I'll add to that: how do you determine whether materials dredged from the river are sent to the UDF, shipped out of state, or discharged back into the river? What happens to the material that is sent away?
Yeah, the first question, I think we kind of doubling the crew. I think that was covered in the last discussion. As far as the material going to the, and I'm trying to remember the question correctly. One of the things, the material where it goes off site, we would basically determine that, we would identify a number of locations in the basically final design process. It would be a licensed out-of-state landfill that could receive the material by rail. So we would have to identify a number of candidate sites, landfills located in different states that would be licensed to receive the material.
Thank you. Joe, could we do one more?
Absolutely.
One more, okay. Could you describe, I think, Kevin, this would be for you, the reason for the multiple year delay between dredging completion and cap installation? If not capped promptly, the dredged areas will potentially become a source for downstream redistribution of the loose residuals remaining after dredging.
Yes, there is approximately like a 5-year gap between the final removal in Woods Pond and then the capping. That is done to let all the upstream work be completed in 5A, 5B, and 5C. That includes the removal and capping in the upstream areas. That is any potential material that's resuspended and settles in Woods Pond would be basically considered before we did the work there. It's you know, the settling rate in Woods Pond is not too great, so we would remove in the initial phase to accommodate the 6-foot final depth, plus any area that we would have to, you know, thickness of any cap that would be installed, and probably also anticipate any potential settling that would occur in those intervening 5 years. So we may have to remove to get a 6-foot final depth and with a 1-foot cap install, we may have to go down 18 inches just to account for any settling as well. So that we did want to do the final cap there, so all the upstream work is totally completed. So that would be no impact on the cap that was installed in the Woods Pond area.
Right, and this is Dean again. I'll weigh in by expediting these two actions at once. The other alternative to not excavating Woods Pond now, remember that material would just be sitting there, and all that material would be a source for downstream. So by getting rid of this large source up front, you're limiting any downstream potential migration to what the residual contamination is in Woods Pond, which will be, you know, less than it is now. So all of this is done, like Kevin said, to get the most mass out as quickly as possible and actually start the final capping as quickly as possible. And this will expedite the whole project by about 3 or 4 years had we gone just strictly 5A, 5B, 5C, then Woods Pond. So it may be counterintuitive, but there's actually a lot less potential for downstream migration by excavating and not doing the final cap on Woods Pond up front.
Thank you very much, Dean and Kevin. Going to go to another Kevin. Kevin Farrar. I'm sorry if I'm not saying the name right. I see your hand up, sir. Do you have a question?
Yes, it's Farrar, by the way. Thank you for trying. Yeah, I do have a couple questions. I'm not sure I heard the answer. It was talked about a little while ago. What is the cleanup level to be used in Woods Pond? What's the basis for the delineation of the dredged area?
The cleanup level for the criteria for Woods Pond is a depth removal. So we are removing essentially down to 6 feet in the entire Woods Pond area. And based on the PCB data we have, that removes the vast bulk of the PCB mass from Woods Pond.
So if you get down 6 feet, what do the concentrations look like in Woods Pond?
I think they drop off to some degree. I don't know that off the top of my head. And any remaining PCB concentrations would then be capped at a later date.
5 years later, right?
Right.
Right. So, but how do these today's surface sediment concentrations compare to what you would be leaving open for 5 years once the 6 foot of sediment's removed?
I don't know offhand. Maybe I have one of my consultants on the call as well, Mike Worth. Maybe Mike can speak to that a little bit. Mike can unmute himself.
We can look to get back to you. Maybe that's the easiest way. It's
Okay.
probably not something anybody has off the top of their
That's
head.
fine.
Yeah.
You understand the point I'm making, though. You were saying, Dean, that
Yeah.
It's better, and I'm just
I-
trying to get the data to understand that.
I got it. And, maybe I spoke without seeing the data. My recollection is it's better, but what I do know is better is doing two removals at once speeds up the whole process by 5 years. So the amount of time that material will be exposed will be less.
Yep.
Hopefully the concentrations are lower. So I appreciate your question.
Yep. And then I have a second, completely very tangentially related question. Can someone please describe the air monitoring program to protect the community during the dredging work when it's going on? Methods, frequency, turnaround times, data availability, that sort of thing.
That is pretty much covered in the quality of life plan. Basically, we will have air monitors, UV monitoring for dust and PCBs with a background station, and we'll have also data collection where we determine most likely areas that there'll be receptors that potentially impact people. The exact details of all that, or the frequency of sampling, there'll be some sampling up front in the project to establish what the levels are, and as different equipment or different activities progress, during those periods we would increase the sampling to just get comfortable that they're not impacting anything. The turnaround time would be as quick as it's probably, I think standard turnaround time is a week to the PCB air sampling data. We may be able to get it quicker if we work it out with the lab. So there will be regular air sampling in place during the work, the remediation work. Probably more upfront.
So Kevin, a little more, two Kevins, a little more detail is it's the 24, Kevin, I know you're familiar with this. It's the 24-hour puff sample. So it's particulate and vapor phase. And like Kevin Mooney said, that the turnaround time will come in, and all the details on action levels, criteria for stop work, criteria for additional sampling. I know you're relatively new. We've had a couple meetings on that, but it is all in that quality of life plan where the second version of that, where that input's due in early February. So hopefully that's helpful.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we go to the next
We
Hey,
can't
Joe,
hear you.
you're cutting out right now.
I am?
Now you're good.
Yikes. Kelsey, I was going to ask if you had any other questions in the Q&A box.
Yeah, I just wanted to, while we were discussing the air monitoring, Kevin, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but for the audience and people who ask questions relative to air, fair to say that there is not an air monitoring plan as of yet, and that will be developed. There were questions about air monitoring upstream and downstream, also during dredging when sediment is exposed. And then some other questions about other additional things to monitor for, such as PM 2.5, hydrogen sulfide, noise levels, to ensure transparency and protect the community throughout. So just a number of questions relative to air monitoring. I just want to be clear that we raised those, but I believe your answer addressed a number of that if you want to elaborate at all.
I'll kind of reiterate the general approach that will be used at all the remedial sites is covered by the revised quality of life plan that was submitted to EPA and still being reviewed. And I think Dean just mentioned you can still comment on that. The specifics of how the quality of life standards will be complied with and the monitoring as part of the Reach 6 work is going to be completed in the final design. So all those details, once we kind of get a little more detail with this remediation will entail, the final design will have all those specifics about all the quality of life monitoring that would need to be done during this remediation.
And Kevin, I'll also add that the quality of life plan does discuss, as you said, that plan is open for public input through February 10th. One thing to note is when we do talk about air monitoring, there has been a lot of misconception that we're only monitoring for particulate matter. That's not true. There will be particulate and vapor phase monitoring throughout the entire remedy cleanup. The frequency of vapor and particulate may differ. One has to be sent to a lab where one is more live monitoring. But like Kevin said, the specifics for air monitoring for the Reach 6 cleanup will be included in the final design plan. Dean, I see you're unmuted. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I forgot to unmute. Sorry, guys. Thanks, Josh. I saw that Nat had a hand up, but he put it down. So raise your hand again if you still have a question. Otherwise, Charles Ciaffarini, you have a question, sir?
Yes, thank you. Charlie Ciaffarini, Citizens for PCB Removal. Hi, Kevin. Haven't seen you in a long time. The beard makes you look like an old man. You shouldn't do that to yourself. But I was asking one of the questions about air monitoring because traditionally air monitoring has always been where the work is being done, adjacent to those areas. But we're concerned that as once you get past the Woods Pond Dam, the flow of water is going to be reduced because of the amount of water coming out as part of the dredging process, which is going to expose riverbanks and potentially could cause evaporation and sediment to get blown in the air into the residential areas. So I've looked at the quality of life program that's been proposed. Nothing is talking about those lower reaches of the riverbanks to have additional air monitoring down there to ensure that the reduced flow of water doesn't cause this dried sediment and dust to blow into the communities and the residential areas along those stretches of river. So again, I understand all your other stuff, but I want to make sure that gets in any future revised quality of life, because I think that could be a real big potential of a problem with the reduced flow in the river. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Josh, did you want to respond to that or?
I'll just make one. Yeah.
Go ahead,
Sorry,
Kevin.
I'll jump in real quick and I'll let you follow up. Thanks for your comment, Charlie. One thing that needs to be also kept in mind is, yes, the hydraulic dredging will be removing some water, but there's also going to be a continuous backflow as well as water is treated and returned to the river. So although there may be a reduction in water flow overall, it's not, we don't anticipate it going dry and increasing exposure to different sediments and such. Kevin, did you want to add to that?
No, I agree with you, Josh. I mean, basically, as we do the dewatering and treat the water, it'll be put back in Woods Pond and the Housatonic River. The other thing I wanted to point out about that, the rate at which we're taking out water with the hydraulic dredging is going to be orders of magnitude lower than the actual flow in the river. So we do not anticipate that the hydraulic dredging will be drying up any significantly lowering the flow in Woods Pond or the river to expose sediment banks.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna go to Nat. If you, Nat Romano, we can unmute you and you have a question?
Yeah,
Matt?
hi. Can you hear me
Hi.
okay?
Yep.
All right, great. I just had a question about, there's going to be air monitoring and for hydrogen sulfide and all these other things. But then you mentioned earlier that the core samples that were taken to determine the area that's going to be dredged for the whole project were taken back in 2001. So I was curious if there's going to be monitoring of the dredge as it comes up, in case it needs to be like altered, whether it's going to go to the local landfill or whether it needs to be taken out of state to a high heat processing.
Well, just basically there was more data collected in 2023. And it was a pretty much extensive data collected on a grid pattern. If you think back to those figures I showed in the sediment and also the floodplain, those were the yellow squares. So the historic data, the most recent historic data was from, as you said, from around 2001. But then the most recent data we just collected was only in 2023. So we feel like we've adequately characterized both the sediment and the floodplain for this remedial area, and we have a good handle on what the existing current concentrations are based on that. And basically, more data was collected in this recent round than all the historic data that came before it. So we have a good coverage of very current data.
Okay, but is there testing of the dredge that comes up as it comes up? Because there's part of the plan involves returning the water to the area, right? So presumably in that process, it would be tested before it's returned.
Yes, basically the material taken, the sediment slurry taken out of Woods Pond as part of the hydraulic dredging process is going to be pumped up to the UDF area. In an area in the UDF, there'll be dewatering. And there will be a water treatment plant on site up there. EPA will give us a discharge limit. That water will be treated to that discharge limit. And then once it meets that discharge limit, it will be discharged back into Woods Pond or the Housatonic River.
Okay, and there's going to be, presumably in the quality of life plan, there's going to be a lot of information given through these processes to the public, because I lived by the GE Site 9 when it was being decommissioned, and I used to jog around there every single day and had no idea what was going on. So I think also with the 5 years and with the exposed areas and it being like a recreation area, to make sure that there's very good communication throughout the whole process.
Right.
That would probably make a lot of people in the community feel at ease about and trusting of the remediation processes. So
Right.
thank you for your time.
Yeah,
Thank
Nat,
you
this
for your
is
question.
Nat, this is one clarification from Dan. I think you might have mentioned that the material going off site may be subject to high temperature treatment. I don't think that's the case. These levels are so low and they're just PCBs, the contaminant, the concern, it's going to go into a landfill. It's just an out-of-state landfill. It doesn't require thermal treatment.
Okay, thank you, Dean, for clarifying.
Yeah,
One
Nat, just
last-
one more thing.
Go ahead.
One more note to add. Although the quality of life plan gives the general overview of the different aspects, for instance, noise, air monitoring, light, all those different parameters, the specifics per reach will be included in a section within the final design plan. So the current conceptual plan, which is the 10,000-foot view of what GE is proposing to do, gives us the general sense of where the cleanup is going. Whereas when we get to the final, that's when you'll get to more of the specifics of how and specifics of air monitoring requirements, water testing requirements and such. So we're still a ways out, but those details will be provided in the future.
Okay, thank you, Josh.
Awesome, thank you. Before I take another raised hand question, I wanted to check in with Kelsey. Kelsey, do we have any questions in the Q&A box?
Hi, we do. So I'm going to go to Josh Bloom's questions. I appreciate your patience there, Josh. We have some collected together here. So the first is, what baseline public health data has been collected or will be collected from any residents who live or work near the remediation areas in the reaches discussed tonight? Dean, do you want to take that one, please?
Yeah, that's really not for GE. That's for EPA. EPA doesn't collect baseline health data. We haven't done it for the first 20 years of the site. We won't be doing it now to the extent there's health data available. The Mass DPH has some data. They have cancer registries. I think they talked about that. You might not have been at the last meeting when they're doing their cancer incidence study. There's a fair amount of data for historic cancer incident rates. That would be the data that would be available pre-remediation.
Thank you. So the others are dredging related. And I think, Kevin, I'll direct these to you. I'd add a couple in addition to Josh's that were previously asked. So I'll read them out and happy to repeat. What are the anticipated hours for hydraulic dredging? How noisy do you anticipate it being? Is there any unpleasant scent anticipated from the dredging? And if floodplain soil is removed, is it replaced or is it capped? If you could also add, and I think you mentioned this already, but just clarify the cleanup levels and how you are able to delineate the sediment removal in the ponds to determine the levels.
I may ask you to repeat some, but
Sure.
the anticipated hours, right now, we're looking at kind of Monday through Friday, and particularly like a longer construction day, 10 hours, maybe some work on Saturdays. But again, that's going to be looked at more in the final design, and it'll also be discussed when you bring a contractor on board about the most efficient way to get the work done as quickly as possible. Some of them, some of the equipment that we use will make noise, but we're going to do our best to, have mufflers, shrouds, and keep the noise level down to a manageable level and stay within the requirements of the quality of life plan as far as noise impacts to the surrounding area. As unpleasant scents, we don't anticipate any. We typically in projects like this, what may cause unpleasant scents is decaying vegetation. We'll have to remove some of that, but we'll take steps to minimize or eliminate any odors that may cause. And could you, I kind of lost it after that, if you can make some more questions. I think you're muted, Kelsey.
Sorry, the other, which is regarding floodplain soils that will be removed, will it be replaced or capped?
Okay, yeah, the floodplain soils, they are backfilled and the area will be restored to how it was before. So depending on what kind of area it was, if it was more wetland or upland, it'll be restored in kind. But that will be full removal and capping clean material.
Thank you. And if I could just add one more question, I think that is somewhat related. Could you explain what the cobble armored layer in Woods Pond is? I don't know if you spoke to that
sure.
or not.
And that goes into the capping. I kind of got that. And this has to be further designed and evaluated in the final design process. But the cap will have a chemical isolation layer, kind of an erosion protection layer, and then maybe a habitat layer. That all kind of goes together. But in areas that are exposed, the cobble area would be in the outlet channel, and then the channel through the pond. basically areas that we evaluate have higher flows or see higher velocities. We'll use a larger stone to keep the cap in place. So again, we have hydraulic models that we use to evaluate that. We've collected actually data in the pond to look at velocities. So we can size the material appropriately based on the expected velocities. Not just the average velocities, but kind of the extreme velocities we would see under an extreme condition.
Thank you. A few more questions. Valerie Anderson, I see your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Where are the results of the 2023 sampling housed? If it's on the website, could you put a link in the description box in the Q&A box? Is that where they're housed?
Valerie, they were included in the PDI summary report, the pre-design investigation report, which was submitted to EPA October 31st, along with the conceptual design. So I'm assuming EPA has posted that report on their website.
Okay, I couldn't really hear you. What report was it, October 31st?
It was the PDI summary report. So the pre-design investigation report.
Valerie, I just added the link into the Q&A, so that should be available now. That is one of the documents that are currently open for public input until February 3rd.
Okay, great. Thank you. And also, for years, we've been under the understanding and have been told that there's tons of PCBs behind the Woods Pond Dam, that it all flowed down from Pittsfield and got deposited behind the Woods Pond Dam. So did you sample that? I find it really hard to believe that there's only low-level PCBs there behind the dam.
So are you talking about the wood pond proper or the dam? There has, there's a fair amount of material that has deposited in Woods Pond over the years. The velocities in the outlet channel that lead up to the dam see somewhat higher velocities, so you don't see as much deposition in those areas. And then when I say that, that's the area immediately behind the dam, or further upstream in the more quiescent areas of Woods Pond is where you see the settling.
I'm really having a hard time understanding you. I'm sorry, but yeah, behind the dam, there's tons of PCBs.
I can answer that, Valerie. They
Okay,
did
thank you.
sample extensively behind the dam and in Woods Pond. So you can look at the Reach 6 PDI report. It's all relative what you mean by high or low levels of PCBs. The levels on average are less than 25. That's what the data shows. But that doesn't mean it's insignificant PCBs and it should be removed. But yes, that the Woods Pond itself, sediment in Woods Pond, all the way up to the headwaters and even farther up, have been extensively sampled, and you'll see that data in the pre-design investigation report.
Okay, so we were just told, maybe I'm misunderstanding it, that all the sediment from Woods Pond is going into the UDF because it's relatively low level. So the stuff behind the dam is going into the UDF too?
That's what GE presented. We're looking at the data. It's the average behind Woods Pond from the neck of the outlet channel and Woods Pond itself, all averages less than 25. That's what Kevin said, yes.
Okay, well, I hope you do look into it because for years we've been told that it's all collecting there and it's hard to believe it's less than 25. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me take one more raised hand before we go back to Q&A. I thought I saw another hand up, but Josh Bloom, Do you have a question, sir?
I do. I wanted to know why health is not considered part of GE's responsibility when it's part of the quality of life. In section 7, it's the community coordination and health and safety. And there's no mention of health in that section of the report. So why has GE have a plan about health, but not talk about health, and has been asked not to talk about health here in this meeting?
I don't know
Question
if
was
anything.
specifically background health data. That's different than protection of health during the remediation. Two distinctly different operations. GE can talk about how they're going to handle how they're going to address health concerns for contaminants during remediation, but no, it's not part of the permit. It's not their responsibility to do health tracking, health surveys, pre, during, and post. That's Mass DPH's job should they choose to do that. So Kevin, if you want to talk about a little bit the methods, which I know are in the other plans, not really subject tonight, but on protection of human health that GE is going to do during remediation, maybe you want to weigh in with some general comments.
Generally, I mean, a lot of that is covered under the quality of life plan, basically covering exposure, air exposure, odor, noise, any impacts that the remedial activities would subject, people adjacent to the area. That is going to be monitored and watched. And if there are issues, we'll shut down operations and mitigate the situation or eliminate it. That would be, to me, the main way that we're going to look and monitor for impacts to health and safety to the general public during the remediation activities.
Thank you very much. The other hand I thought I saw up was Bill. Bill, do you have a question tonight? Bill Sheen?
I do. Good evening. It's Bill Shine from the Berkshire Argus. Just a follow-up question on the sampling data. And wondering if you can characterize any differences in the historical data and the more recent data in Woods Pond, particularly any core samples that were taken in locations near the historical data, and just sort of an overall characterization of the PCB levels that you found in the testing 25 years apart.
Bill, I don't have that information, quickly available to me. That was kind of put together to evaluate the remediation, and it wasn't really a historical comparison done at that time in terms of using this information to design the conceptual remediation for Woods Pond. So I'd have to go back and fully look at the data to be able to answer your question.
Okay, but that data is publicly available though, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. Kelsey, let me check in with you again. Are there any other questions in the Q&A?
We do. We've got a few left, so I'll try and run through a couple. We have two related to risk. So question is it risky to hike in Woods Pond or around Woods Pond? And is it risky to wade in the Housatonic even with waders? Sorry, I didn't direct that. I think, Kevin, if you would want to address that.
Yeah, I think that's probably more a question for EPA to answer.
I'll do my best. This is Dean. So EPA, like we mentioned, did this very detailed human health risk assessment, determine where there are risks, where remediation needed to occur. As far as wading in the river, that was not determined to be a risk. There'd have to be extremely massive frequency that you're in the river, even beyond like what is even feasible for most of the river. As far as hiking around Woods Pond, I think Kevin mentioned part of this permit, there are some risks there, not as much as fish consumption, but some risks to direct contact. If you have continuous and constant excuse me, that's redundant, continuous exposure over a long period of time, several years in some of the floodplain soil. And I think, Kevin, you mentioned 2 of the floodplain areas around Woods Pond do require soil remediation. So those would be the areas, for example, if you had exposure greater than, I don't know the exact criteria, 90 days per year for 20 years, and you came in contact with that soil on that path repeatedly, there would be an increased health risk. So I can't say it's 0, but as far as wading in the river, it was below risk-based standards, and there is some limited risk on some of the pathways. But again, you'd have to get the soil absorbed to your skin repeatedly in that pathway.
Thank you, Dean. So we are like almost out of time. We've got about 5 minutes left. Kelsey, are there any outstanding questions in the Q&A box that we can address?
Yeah,
Or
I'll try
should
and do a
address?
couple quickly related to the PCBs. One note, a quick question: is there a plan to consider use of biochar for remediation? Dean or Josh, I don't know if you want to speak to that relative to the, maybe to the, what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry for the challenge, maybe.
The PCB challenge, that might be one thing that's evaluated. I'll let Kevin talk about the biochar. Biochar, my understanding is it's just a carbon-based material that would go in potentially a cap. Kevin, maybe you can talk a little bit about, without getting into too much detail, the sorptive cap that you're going to place and GE is going to place in Woods Pond and other places in the river and vernal pools.
Right, there actually is a number of areas in the overall rest of river remediation that calls for the use of activated carbon, which is, I think, biochar is one form of that. There's other forms that can be used, and particularly for the Woods Pond cap, and this will be further evaluated into the final design. As I spoke before, part of the cap component would be a chemical isolation layer. And part of what may go into that chemical isolation layer is a component of activated carbon. Biochar would be one example of a source that we potentially use for that activated carbon. As I mentioned before, there's a number of other sources that you could use for that activated carbon. So in terms, maybe not biochar specifically, but there probably will be some component of activated carbon, or at least it will be considered for use in the cap for Woods Pond.
Thank you. We're down to 3 minutes. Kelsey, is anything else that we need to ask or answer?
One other, it appears that there's approximately 2% of PCBs removed from Woods Pond, and the surrounding area will be taken out of the area for disposal. The remaining 98% will be deposited in the proposed landfill in Lee. Is this accurate?
Yes, I think that's an accurate statement based on the numbers we presented tonight.
All right, thank you very much. So I see one more hand up. We're gonna get to that. And then we're going to give you guys a list of what deadlines are coming up. But please remember, any questions, you can reach out to us. Any questions that you didn't have a chance to ask or you think of tomorrow, you reach out to EPA, Lauren Draper, or through the website contact, and we'll answer them. But Denny, if you still have a question, I see your hand up, sir. You've got a minute.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, good. Okay, I'm going to read a statement. Climate change predictions from the feds, the Commonwealth, from the Weather Service in Albany, all warn that poison situated in the aquatic environment of this river are in rapidly increasing danger of release by flooding because of climate change. time is no longer on our side, anybody's side. Once released by predicted flooding, these contaminated sediments will be swept through our communities and deposited down here. It's my opinion that the proposed timeline being discussed this evening is dangerously long. I've looked at the climate updated hazard mitigation plans for the towns along the river, and the risk rises as you go downstream. Most of the risk we've been discussing tonight has had to do with around Woods Pond. I just think that the process should be reconfigured with the consideration for the much larger areas subject to flooding, which are located in Great Barrington, Sheffield, and Stockbridge. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. All right, before we, Josh, I don't know if you want to throw up those slides as we end it out. Kelsey, did we answer all the questions that we needed to? If you're on your, yeah.
I think we did get a few in. I'm not sure that we'll be able to get to them all. I guess I would raise a question about adhering to local municipal noise regulations was asked a couple of times. Kevin, I think you addressed that to some degree. I don't know if you want to circle back quickly.
Yes, I mean, there are some of the local ordinances on noise vary. Some of them are not related or qualitative or not, or if they're quantitative, they don't relate to the areas that we would necessarily be working in. What we have here are kind of noise standards that are kind of consistent throughout the whole project, and basically that kind of EPA has reviewed and basically approved in the conditional approval letter of the quality of life plan, which kind of makes sense and are kind of reasonable for the work that we're doing. And again, that is, I think, open to public comment at this point right now.
Thank you. And thank everybody for joining us tonight and all your questions. Josh, do you want to sort of walk us through all the opportunities to provide input to EPA right now?
Sure. So first off, there were several questions we were unable to get to tonight. We invite you to send any unanswered questions to our R1 Housatonic at epa.gov. For Reach 6 input deadlines, right now we have 3 documents that input is requested by February 3rd. That is the conceptual remedial design, remedial action work plan for Reach 6, the pre-design investigation report for Reach 6. Circling back to some of those other questions, that document is the one that houses the data that was collected to help design this remedial design or remedial action. And then also we have the baseline restoration assessment report for Reach 6. And then we're requesting input by February 17th for the Phase 1B Cultural Resources Survey work plan for Reach 6. And then we have some additional input periods that are open right now with input requested by February 10th. That includes the revised quality of life plan, the revised updated project operations plan, the revised UDF final design plan, the revised UDF operations monitoring and maintenance plan, and the proposed dewatering and water treatment systems for upland disposal facility area, addenda to the UDF final design plan, and UDF revised operations monitoring and maintenance plan. On the EPA website for the site, there's a opportunities for input tab. You'll have direct links to all of these documents on that page. And if you have any issues accessing any of these documents, please do not hesitate to reach out to either the R1 Housatonic at epa.gov, or you can also reach out to Lauren Draper, our CIC for the site.
Thank you very much. And thank everybody for joining us and taking the time out of your busy schedules to provide public input. It really makes a difference, and we do listen, and we appreciate your help as we move forward. So thank you all very much for joining us tonight, and we'll let you know the next meeting when it's set up. So goodbye all. Good night.